Good morning to everybody, and thank you very much for accepting the call my paper for this presentation. I want to especially thank the conference committee that accept this paper, notwithstanding the fact that it's not too narrowly related to the Quranic studies, which is the focus of the conference. This presentation must be considered as a joint work between me and my colleague Pietro Menghini. He's an historian and he has been just working on the Sadrist movement in the 90s and more a political scientist and a forthcoming book on Islamic politics, which I studied especially from the point of view of Sunni, but which I hope with this new project on the Sadrist to open to the Shia world. So this is must be understood as an ongoing project. Actually, this is the beginning of a project that hopefully my colleague and I want to develop into a book. So the way I organized my presentation is to divide it into parts. The first is about the Islamic politics in the Quran and the Sunnah, which is more based on my own previous effort. And the second is the Iraqi-Sadrist trend, theology of action. This is how I call it, which is based partly from the Menghini effort. So, regarding the first part, we have to say that the Quran does not deal with politics as a science of government. I mean, there is not a straightforward frame of politics as politics understood in the classical sense of management of power. However, Muslims understood politics since the beginning of the history of Islam as part of the ethical mission of Islam. So they looked at the Prophet's experience and they read the Quran and they tried to make sense of how they should deal with the politics. Yes. It is known that in the first period, in the Meccan period, the message was ethical and very social on the backdrop of the eschatological uh, verses, of course. But what is important is that in this period, the Prophet denounces the Meccan elite as being equally an unjust and a impious elite, which just means unethical, and unethical means, in a sense, socially unjust. So, in this sense, it is political. For example, we see in the Quran 107, verses 1 3, hast you seen him who cries, lies to the tomb? That is, he who repulses the orphan and urges not the feeding of the needy. So the one that does not believe to the final judgment is also the one that is unjust with the weak of society. This was just one example. Then, after the Hijrah in Medina, the message in the Quran became more straightforwardly political, besides the famous Medina chart, which established the frame for the new community to live together. It's more straightforwardly political because it deals with law. There is a new community, the Muslim community, the Ummah, which provides the ideology, we can say, of the new society, and the Prophet is asked to give orders about the social behavior of people and specific norm to be followed. So called the law. The law will come from here. But what I'm doing and what I'm arguing is that by reading the Quran and notwithstanding the fact that there is not this straightforward political frame, we can derive it from four main themes, which I will develop very shortly. The first one is the obedience to the legitimate ruler and the necessity of commandment. The first principle is expressed in the so-called Ayat Omara, the verses of commandment, and the famous narrations, in particular this one I'm quoting. If three people are traveling, then appoint one from amongst you to be the Amir. So this is a clear incitement of the fact that commandment, leadership, and government, it is a necessity for society. But how should be this relationship between the rulers and the ruled. So, in other words, to which extent should be this obedience applied? And here, interestingly, behind the concept of justice, the Quran put limits to the rulers. So the rulers, they have not unlimited powers. They must give rights, and they have to be binded in ruling by applying justice. For example, Quran 461, God commands you to deliver trusts back to their owners. And when you judge between the people, that you judge with justice. And also, in general, the Muslims, be it the ruler or the ruled, is called to be just. So Quran 5:11, be you securers of justice, witnesses for God. Be equitable, this is near to God fear. So being equitable may be understood as good governance. So be just and also be equitable. But most interestingly, the third point leads us to the activist side of the Quran when it calls to this justice to be applied in the famous commandment of commanding good and forbidding wrong. Let there be one nation of you calling to good and banding to honor and forbidding dishonor. These are the prosperous Quran 100, for example. It means that the justice must be applied. The Muslim community is one that applies justice in practice. And even further, the Quran does into what someone like Parrot has been calling the just war, whereby God allows those who suffer injustice to fight. Like in Quran 22:40, leave is given to those who fight because they were wronged. Finally, so how does it course this action in a quietistic way when the Quran says do it with the heart, or in political way when it says do it with the tongue, and also a revolutionary way when it says do it with the hand. Okay, so there is finally the fourth point, the shura, which is probably more controversial for Shia, but generally understood as the Islamic method of government, especially from the Sunni Islamist movements, which they recommend, as in the Quran 42:38, their affair being counsel between them, which for modern Islamists, it is kind of Islamic democracy of government. Let's go to the second part indeed, and let's see how there is a development of an Iraqi trend, and there is a specific sadrist theology of action. The development in Iraq and elsewhere, also in Iran, of course, starts from the 50s, and the role of clerics in politics is debated, their prerogatives, and how should be constructed an Islamic state. This goes through the claiming for the clerics, for the jurists, the Wilayat al-Amma. In Iraq, in the 50s, the first one is Mohammed Hussein Kashif al-Khitteh, but then there is the development of Khomeinism. Let's not forget that in the 60s, Khomeini was in Najaf, so it is part of a general debate about the extension of the prerogatives of the jurist. Ayatollah al-Khomeini, Iraqi, is opposed to the Wilayat al-Faqih. He opposed to the Wilayat al-Amma, Wilayat al-Khas. He can see the jurists sometimes to have limited, to have a right to government, but only in certain subjects, what he calls the Wilayat al-Tasarruf. Ali al-Sistani, the Ayatollah al-Sistani, Najaf still there, endorsed this view and develops the so-called quietist Iraqi trend, we may call it. But there is also a politicized trend which comes from Mohammed Bakr al-Sadr, who develops this concept of Wilayat al-Ummah. Instead of the Wilayat al-Faqih, he says that sovereignty is on the Ummah, is on the Muslim societies, from the people. Similar to Shirazi, he developed a frame of the Islamic state or Islamic government where the jurists have a consultative role, so not a direct role in a rulership. He also developed this idea of an institution, an objective marja'iyya, where he thinks that the criteria for the marja to become marja al should be more objectively established, and not like it is the case giving too much importance to networking, because like it is the case in Najaf al with the Khoi, the Sistani network. There is a kind of power within the institution that prevent somehow the enter into this network of outsiders. Finally, the Sadrist theology of action. This is based on two pillars. On one side, what I call the nationalism based on the idea of Wilayat Khasa, and the second on Mahdism, on revolution or millenarianism, based on the idea of Mahdism. This is very particular of the Sadrist. It is, of course, developed on the way it then will develop the social movement, the so-called Sadrist trends, but theologically he developed a kind of a notion of nationalism, where he distinguished himself from Khomeini, in that he claimed for himself a wilaya on Iraq. In other words, a wilaya based on a geographical, geographical limits, which is the limits of the nation state. In this case of Iraq, as opposed to Khomeini universalist theory of the jurist. So Arling here says that it is the concept of wilayat al-khas that used geographically Sadr to elaborate on this idea. I'm not sure 100%, but I take from him. So this is it's theological nationalism, but there is on the other side also a revolutionary millenarism, where Sadr, very interesting, he comes back with the theory of, he comes back with a millenaristic theory, where he sees that in militaristic and activist theology, where he sees the role of the cleric, the jurist, that the qualified jurist, to be active in society in case like it is the case in Saddam Hussein Iraq. He cannot straightforwardly take power, so he should become militant, should be activist, he should go to society to spread Islam through dawah, of course, and to create a mechanism, a movement of a bottom-up taking of power through the Islamization from below of society. So the jurists in this case will then take political and religious authority through a revolutionary process, what they call a theology of action. So this process, which will lead to the Islamic government of the jurist, it is also necessary for the return of the Mahdi. It is a preparatory step. Very interesting. He also finally describes the jurist as not only having authority based on knowledge and religion, but also as being in touch with their communities, share their conditions, and have an active and militant approach to religion. This is in order to hasten the Mahdi return. So, in 15 minutes more or less, what I did was to highlight a political frame in Islam, which I drew from 4 themes, and I also argued that there is a specific development of the Iraqi branch based on the idea of Wilayat al-Ummah, which is thereafter developed even further in a more regional way by Mohammed Sadr into what I call a theology of action, where he take the theory Wilayat al-Faqih into a nationalist, in a nationalist narrow frame through the idea of Wilayat al-Khasa, and he also developed a kind of revolutionary Mahdism, where the creation of a social movement should be an active process through which the society will create an Islamic government and also will make sure to hasten the return of the Imam.